So what I want to talk about today is whether or not you would consider buying a property that is tenanted, already has a tenant in place, and whether that's an advantage or whether it's a disadvantage. And at face value, it probably sounds like nirvana, doesn't it? Because, you know, just buy a property that's got a tenant, because it does have some pros. I mean, there's negotiating strength that comes with that. Because if you think about the market being roughly 70% owner-occupiers and 30% tenants or investors, if I'm taking away the owner-occupiers out of the equation because they don't want to buy a property that has a tenant in there long term, it means that the pool of buyers is lower and can actually give me improved negotiating strength, which is what I want. The other thing is it actually saves money because it's seamless. You know, we're buying this property and from day one, we've got a tenant in place paying us a rent, which is just exactly what we want as a property investor. Minimal vacancies, so that's by far the biggest expense we will have as a property investor, bar none, is a vacancy. It also saves us a lot of time, because if you think about, if I'm vetting tenants and I have to go through the application process and that takes a bit of time, and then all of a sudden I say yes to a tenant and then they go, sorry, I've already found another one, we have to repeat the process again. So it certainly saves us an enormous amount of time if it's already in place. And if you think about the biggest anxiety any property investor has is the stress that comes from wondering whether or not they'll get a tenant in the first place. So if it's already in place, we remove that layer of anxiety. Now, of course, the cons are, what if you're buying a property, it is tenanted, but those tenants are substandard? They actually aren't very good tenants at all. Or what if it's actually the reason why the current vendor wants to sell that property and you won't really know that? So that's definitely a con. The other con is, what if there's no management agreement in place? It's been self-managed by the existing vendor, which means that I've got to come in, put a property manager in place, and that tenant might not actually like that level of accountability because they've had it so good for so long. And I guess another further to that point is, what if they've been paying under market rent? You know, they've been in the property for some time and the current owner just didn't want to raise the rent because they were happy to keep that tenant. You as the new buyer actually want to get that rent back up to market so you can get a good return for the investment dollar. And that's often sometimes very difficult to do. And the other con to think about is might have an opportunistic tenant. New owner, here's a whole list of things that I want. Fly screens, ceiling fans, I want an air conditioner put in, I want this fixed. And they wouldn't normally have done that on the previous vendor. And some of those could be legitimate, but if you're an amateur first-time investor, you may sort of see that list as something that you've just got to act on and see costs coming out. So there's a few questions that you should ask if you're buying a property that's already got a tenant. What are the specifics of the lease agreement? Find out how much they're paying. Find out how long the lease actually is. Find out who the property manager is. Talk to that property manager and find out as much as you can about that tenant before committing to the decision. And of course, find out how long has that actual tenant lived there, because that's going to give you an enormous amount of intel on what questions you need to ask. And the final question I really want to know is, has there been lots of turnover, or has it got a history of having long-term tenants? Because if there's lots of turnover, that may be an indication that there's something wrong with the property that you need to sort of unpack a little bit further. But my conclusion is quite simple, that generally speaking, it's actually a good thing to buy a property that has a tenant in place. But just remember, it's a secondary consideration, because the primary consideration still remains. You still got to get the best locations and the asset selection is paramount. That's your primary concerns. But if those two things start getting ticked off and you can find a property that has a tenant in place, that could very well be a good move for you as an investment property.